Hello, poodling arounders. How are you doing today? Today we're talking pets, and as everyone apart from me seemingly is off work on their festive break, I'm just going to talk about a topic that's relevant to very many people who are thinking of getting a new dog. It's all about what to name it. First of all, perhaps I'll explain why this topic came to me. Because in my PR agency, I love to support good causes, we adopt 3 donkeys, but also a dog via the charity The Dogs Trust, who's called Rosie. When I was reading the Dogs Trust magazine, I was a little bit annoyed to see the names of some dogs that had been rehomed, noting that one was called Axel, but it was spelt with an E, not as in the name of my favourite musician, Axl Rose, that doesn't have an E. So I wondered if that was as intended, or just lack of awareness as to how to spell Axel. Then, as my PR agency, Catapult PR, is pretty experienced in handling PR briefs for both pet products and pet insurers, we commissioned some research on various pet topics, and this touched on the question of naming pets. Out of the blue, and pure coincidence really, I was then sent the results of some research by Admiral Pet Insurance, who trawled their records and assessed the most popular names for dogs right now in the UK. With all of this coming together, I thought this a really interesting topic, so let's explore it. Give a dog a bad name is a phrase often used to describe the extreme difficulty of changing people's opinions of you once you've acquired a bad reputation. But can a dog actually be given a bad name by the very people wanting to be good pet parents? When you dive into this subject, you emerge thinking that perhaps this is very possible. As I said, Catapult PR commissioned its own pet owners research survey. This discovered that 1 in 20 pet owners have actually regretted choosing the name that they did for their dog. Delving into some desk research, I discovered that 10 years ago, in 2013, protectyourbubble.com found that 21% of dog owners believed it is just as hard to choose a name for a dog as it is to choose a name for a child. And 1 in 20 had changed the original name they'd selected for their dog after just a few weeks. So, what choices might face dog owners, and where might they get their inspiration? According to the recent Admiral Pet Insurance research, the majority are choosing children's names for their dogs. This is seen as further evidence of the humanisation of pets by what are increasingly pet parents rather than owners, as would once have undoubtedly been the relationship. So let's get to it. Top names for dogs in the UK proved to be Teddy in top spot, then Luna, and then Bella. I half wonder whether the Teddy choice has been partly influenced by the wonderful Bob Mortimer and Paul Whitehouse programme, Gone Fishing. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but Ted is a firm favourite on there. Could it be that Luna has become so popular thanks to the Harry Potter character, Luna Lovegood? Are there any regional differences as well? Having been sent the data, I can tell you that in northwest England, actually, the most popular choices are Teddy, Milo, and Buddy. Maybe that's something to do with elf, or maybe we just like, giving our dog a name that does what it says on the tin when describing the relationship between dog and owner. Admiral notes that 70% of these names actually appear in the top 100 list of baby names for 2022. But then some dog owners are also keeping some older children's names alive, such as Kevin, Derek, and Doris. The latter was actually the choice of my hairdresser for her schnauzer, whilst Dora, another choice, is the name of the pooch owned by one of my clients. Admiral Pet Insurance also notes that it is increasingly difficult to tell whether a person is calling out for the attention of their child or dog when they're out and about. It also talks of the rise of the dinkwads, dual income, no kids, with a dog. The trouble is that it's all getting a bit samey, isn't it? I lived next door to a dog called Lola, who was then replaced by another dog called Lola when the house was sold. My Italian teacher's daughter has a dog called, you guessed it, Lola. And this surely makes things difficult if you're choosing the same name as many other dog owners in the park or the dog training class. So if you're not seduced by the list of modern-day baby names, where else could you look for inspiration? Perhaps going retro and looking at the names of yesteryear is the answer. When I researched this, I found that around 30 years ago, the top 7 names for dogs were Lassie, Lady, Rex, Sandy, Blackie, Bonnie, and Max. There are clearly some film influences here, with Lassie perhaps being the most iconic and heroic dog on the silver screen, and Lady being a very Disney choice, thanks to Lady and the Tramp. It also seemed that pet owners were quite happy to just describe their dog when choosing its name, noting its appearance or colour. Simpler times by far. I actually grew up in a street in Blackpool where I was absolutely terrorised by a tiny dog called Scampy whenever I tried to go to my friend's house at the end of the road. And I also lived opposite a police Alsatian called Bruce. Looking back, I think Scampy was quite a clever spin on the popular name Scamp, although I can't say I ever had that thought when it was biting my heels. Bruce was just a nice, strong name, and if I recall, the policeman was Scottish, so that always helps if you're trying to mark your heritage. Of course, there are even more traditional names that we all associate with dogs, Fido, Rex, Rover, and Bobby being just 4 of them. Fido is the Latin word for faithful, and was a natural choice for a dog, perhaps even in ancient times. Rex was the word for king, but was also the name of Rex the Wonder Dog back in a 1950s cartoon strip. Rover was a common name for hunting dogs in both the UK and the USA in the 18th century, as well as featuring in the name of the first movie to have a dog as its star. And who can not reflect on Greyfriars Bobby, the 19th century dog who spent 14 years guarding the grave of his owner? I certainly can't. Having trolled around Edinburgh for nearly a whole day and not seen this iconic memorial, I was passing by in a car when I suddenly spotted the sign to the statue and forced a quick application of the brakes. I hopped out to photograph it, and having to subtly hint to a team of gardeners that I would really love it if they'd just shift their spade and wheelbarrow a foot or two to the right so I could get a decent pic of the iconic doggy sitting in the peaceful surroundings of a churchyard. If you wanted to go back to antiquity rather than just yesteryear, you could look to the earliest known animal with a specific name. This was Biha, a curly-tailed hunting dog who belonged to an Egyptian nobleman around 4,400 years ago. That name probably derived from Bekai, meaning antelope. Other dogs from history that might inspire you are perhaps Laika. I hope that's how it's pronounced anyway, the first dog in orbit who tragically did not survive a space mission. You might look to name your dog Snuppy, after the first clone dog that's ever survived, or maybe even Rufus, the choice of Winston Churchill. You might want to follow in royal footsteps, calling your dog Cut or Ball, as did Henry VIII, or maybe a softer Dash, which was the choice of Queen Victoria for her King Charles Spaniel. The very first corgi, owned by Queen Elizabeth II, was a rather more standard choice of Susan. Perhaps if you're pretty cultured and well read, you could dip into the pages of some literary classics for an inspired choice. In the novel Jane Eyre, we have a canine called Pilot. In the classic 101 Dalmatians, it's Pongo and Perdita, with some nice alliteration going on there. In Tintin, we have the descriptive choice of Snowy for Tintin's wire fox terrier, whereas in the more modern-day children's classic, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night-Time, the dog in question is named Wellington, a very stiff upper lip British choice. As I'm a big golden retriever lover, even though the sight of one on the street invariably makes me shed a tear, I follow various golden retrievers on Twitter. Sorry, X now, isn't it? One of these is the glorious Pip the golden retriever, with whom I converse in doggy speak quite often. Through these conversations, I've learned that Pip, who lives at the other end of the country from me, in what I would call Charles Dickens country, is named after Pip in the classic Dickens novel Great Expectations. Notably, actor Jake Gyllenhaal, whose name I believe should be pronounced the Swedish way of Gyllenhaal, has gone down this literary route too, paying homage to writer Harper Lee by naming his dogs after 2 characters from her classic To Kill a Mockingbird, a book I love actually, having had to study it for my English A-level. The actors' chosen dog names are Atticus Finch and Boo Radley, which makes them dogs with 2 names effectively rather than 1. Not to worry, however, they won't ever have to fill in forms or tax returns and regret all the letters in their moniker. Be careful, however, as authors can be clever, using the names of their dogs to communicate their nature, purpose, or even characteristics of their owners. Take, for instance, Bullseye, the dog of felon and murderer Bill Sikes in Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist. Move to Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, and we have Gnasher, Wolf, and Skulker, violent beasts who are harbingers of foreboding and communicate Heathcliff's simmering and constant rage. This same mechanic can be used when naming dogs for TV shows. Any soap fan in the UK will probably remember Wellard, the EastEnders dog, who was no doubt named to suggest that he was capable of looking after himself and his owner. Until recently, we had Cerberus the Greyhound in Coronation Street, named after a many-headed dog, and perhaps suggesting the very many facets to the character of Evelyn, played by the amazingly talented Maureen Lipman. You might be safer following the route of the soap's character Chesney, who for many years had Schmeichel the Great Dane, named after the Manchester United goalkeeping hero Peter Schmeichel. Or you could take a leaf out of the Book of the Barlows and choose a geographical reference drawn from your local area as your dog's name. Some may not realise it, but Eccles is a part of Greater Manchester, and one renowned for its unique Eccles cakes, of course. If you're into the world of celebrity and following the fashions they set, you could do a 50 Cent and choose opera for your dog's name. Carrie Fisher was never without Gary, her French bulldog, whilst Audrey Hepburn was frequently pictured with her Yorkshire Terrier, Mr. Famous. If you become obsessed with the Beckhams following their Netflix documentary series, you might like the culinary names of Fig, Sage, and Olive, which they chose for their dogs. Personally, it's many years since I've had the joy of having a doggy in my home. I was so upset when my golden retriever unexpectedly and inexplicably died at age just 7 that my mother banned me from having another dog. And it's just not been possible. Singletons who own their own company and are always on call, and who pre-COVID at least were travelling at least 800 miles a month, just couldn't have a dog in the house. It just wouldn't be fair. But I was never going to be calling my dog anything particularly conventional, and certainly not the once popular choice of Toby. I had an auntie, who wasn't actually my auntie, but you know how these things work in the UK, who originally came from Yorkshire and had a pug called Toby. Now, I really do love Yorkshire folk a lot, and in fact, half my family originate from Yorkshire. But the elongation of the letter O that comes as part and parcel of the Yorkshire accent just grated on me whenever the auntie who wasn't an auntie said, Toby. So I really went down the literary route with my dog, knowing that the puppy I would be inviting to live with me was from Wiltshire, right in the heart of Thomas Hardy country and the fictional Wessex. So for some reason, he was always going to be called Troy, named after Sergeant Troy in The Mayor of Casterbridge, who's actually a bit of an anti-hero, if truth be told. My insistence on this was a little bit odd, really, as I'd never read that particular Hardy book. As is so often true in my life, however, it was either serendipity or completely spooky, as my Troy was a pedigree. When weeks later I received his kennel club details, I realised his pedigree name was Royal Troika, named after a regal Russian coach-type transportation vehicle. Troy and Troika. You couldn't make it up. The trouble was, as I quickly found, he really didn't respond to the name Troy. This harsh reality hit me in the face the very first time I took him to doggy training classes. Nothing really changed thereafter until I started calling him Troy Bear as a term of affection and then shortening this to TB. By then, we'd relocated back north from Bristol and were living in a lovely location for a dog with a mischievous spirit who loved to escape and run across country fields. Calling him back from fields away as Troy was hopeless. When he became TB, everything changed. A few calls of elongated TB soon had him trotting back, only for him to look at the look on my face and at my cowpat-covered hands, those of a woman who'd crawled through hedges and ditches to try to get to him, and then he'd suddenly develop a limp that necessitated being picked up and cuddled. Remarkably, the limp disappeared the minute we got back to the house, after a few face licks had appeased me. He was a very clever dog and knew how to push all of my buttons. But the TB thing is interesting. I'd effectively moved from a one-syllable name to a two-syllable name with elongation of the consonants very possible. And here we broach some of the science behind naming a dog. Some leading animal behaviourists say that a dog's name should be 2 syllables, if dog training is to be optimised, that is. It's said that the dog is alerted by the first syllable and then hears the second syllable and responds. This was exactly what I found when Troy became TB. The The science also suggests that if your dog's name is composed of sharp sounding consonants, particularly P, K, and D, you should get a better reaction from your dog. These are apparently broadband sounds that act like a clicker and create more energy across a range of frequencies. That's the theory of animal behaviourist Patricia McConnell, anyway. Another expert certified dog trainer, Nicole Ellis, suggests that you name your dog something that ends in a vowel, as that, for frequency reasons again, gets their attention more. She called her dog Rossi. At a practical level, leading vets suggest that you don't call your dog by a name that's riding high in the popularity charts. They say it can cause a huge amount of confusion at training sessions and even in the vet surgery. Standing apart and showing some originality seems to be the key message here. Vets also advise against calling pets by a name that can have multiple ways of being spelt, with names like this being Jackson, or if we go back to the start of this podcast, Axel, I suppose. You will have to spell it out every time you make an appointment, and not doing so could lead to paperwork being misplaced or even misfiled. The same, of course, could be true if you call your pet by the name of some weird sci-fi character or even a popular rapper. Very good advice is to not name your dog by a name that sounds like one of the common training commands of heel, sit, come, and stay. So however tempting it may be, avoid Shaquille, Kit, Plum, Shay. Even Oliver can be confused with the command of roll over. Putting some energy into your dog's name when trying to get a response is essential. And to make your dog recognize its name, you need to make sure that its name is associated with positivity and good outcomes, such as a cuddle or a treat when a dog responds to it. There should always be a reason for calling the name, so the dog recognizes a need to respond. Don't call out the name and then administer medicine or shove a pill down its throat. Even I wouldn't respond to that. If you're a multiple dog household, do avoid the temptation to adopt a cute rhyming strategy for your dog's names. Twiggy, Iggy, and Ziggy might just get terribly confused on a daily basis. The golden rules, if there are any, are to choose a name that you think suits your dog's personality, and above all, a name that's not going to lead to extreme embarrassment when shouted out in public or provided to a third party. So, will I ever face this dilemma again? And if so, what would I call my dog? The natural temptation would, of course, be to use the name of my all-time favourite TV dog, Scooby-Doo, who starred in the only TV programme that ever encouraged me to run home from school on a route that was a good 20 minutes walk. I simply couldn't miss the start at any cost to my socks or shoe leather. However, unless you've got a Great Dane, it just doesn't work to call it Scooby-Doo. The fact is, I think I will one day have another dog if I can overcome all the reasons that I can't have one now. Though whether that will be in the UK or in some other country to which I flee one day, who knows? I've already pretty much decided what it would be called too, if I chose something other than a golden retriever, which I may have to do, as there was only one and will only ever be one TB, and I don't want to draw comparisons. Probably better to choose an entirely different breed. So I shall share with you that the name I have semi-chosen, or three-quarters chosen, is Enzo. This is partly because I love all things Italian and have been learning, sometimes with more energy than others, I have to say, the Italian language since the mid-noughties. However, I'm also a huge Ferrari F1 fan and have visited the Enzo Ferrari Museum in Modena and the Ferrari Museum in Maranello a few times now. The Enzo Ferrari Museum in Modena is an extremely beautiful building and incredibly striking at an architectural level, painted in the original Ferrari colour of yellow. But the exhibits are incredible and really communicate the spirit of the early years of motor racing, and Enzo's central part in that as both racer and the guiding spirit behind a dynasty. Please note, by the way, that I haven't yet seen the new Enzo Ferrari movie, and that this has been in my mind for quite some time, so I'm not just jumping on a bandwagon. Then, of course, I'm proving that I can follow some rules, choosing a two-syllable name that also ends in a vowel, even if it's not got a clicker consonant. Should, however, I suddenly find myself sandwiched between houses that both have an Enzo, I won't like that one little bit. So, as I'm poodling around, I shall be thinking of another name to come up with. I might be forced to follow all of the rules and go for a Dido or a Coco, presuming that a hard C is as good as a K. So there we are. A little insight into how difficult it is to give a dog a good name, or, how easy it is perhaps to give it a bad name. Please do share your own pets' names or the naming rationale behind them with me by emailing jane@catapultpr.co.uk, as I'd love to hear what your dog or cat is called and why you called it that. You can also find our office contact details at www.catapultpr.co.uk. But please don't use Google My Business as your reference point, as getting Google to correct an address we've not had for 17 months is seemingly an ask too far, she said with frustration. So that's it for this episode of Poodling Around. But as we further explore the pet research survey findings that we commissioned as part of our pet product and pet insurance PR promotional activity, we shall have more to reveal. I hope you've enjoyed this little look at pets' names, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. In the meantime, take extremely good care of yourself and your pet, whatever it's called, and remember that life's much more fun when you're poodling around.